Hello and a warm welcome to this Kaya Biz special. I'm Gugulethu Mfuphi, the host of Kaya Biz, broadcast on Kaya 959 every Monday to Thursday between 6 and 8 o'clock. Now, on a day-to-day basis, you would know that we talk about the markets, right? Business updates and ongoing events that impact and affect our pockets as well as the economy. But we also take the time out to speak to leaders, individuals who have shaped South Africa's economic narrative by influencing and discussing and even being a part of the business community, the public sector, and of course continue to plow back into the development of people within our economy. Today we speak to a very special guest, closely aligned to Kaya 959 as they are one of our biggest investors and shareholders. That's the chairman of Thebe Investment Group, Nhlanhla Nene, who joins me in studio today. Such a pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Gugu, and your listeners. It is also my pride and honor to be part of your program.
We're looking forward to it because there's a lot to discuss, and typically many might expect me to go back in terms of reference as the role that you've served within the public sector in South Africa, which is an element that we'll get to a little bit later in our conversation. But I must say, I hope that as you are present in the building today, you must be impressed with the investment that Thebe Investment Group has made in Kaya.
Indeed, and it's my first here, and I actually find it very strange that it's only now that I actually walked into Kaya FM. I've only been looking at the figures, but also I listen to the programs.
Indeed. Well, it makes sense because you're an incredibly busy man, and that actually speaks to the role and function that you actually lead at Thebe Investment Corporation. Yeah. And maybe let's illustrate and elaborate a little bit further on that, primarily looking at Thebe's investment mandate and the broad history that it really has within South Africa's economic environment.
Yep. Thebe, as you know, celebrates its 30th. Not today. We turned 30 in July, because it was founded back in 1992. Well, from a meager 100,000 rands donation, Bab Kanyile and the founders, Babu Tatmatiba, Tate Sisulu, Wambe Asnode, and Enos Mabuza. Bab Kanyile has now been part of this. I always refer to him as one of the surviving parents of right. Thebe, and indeed is. It started off, as I say, with that meager 100,000 rands investment, with Bab Kanyile having been at Luthuli House as the bookkeeper in our TG then. And then when he started this, I'm told he actually didn't get paid for 2-3 months because the company was just still trying to. He couldn't pay himself out of this investment, which was a donation, and a trust was formed. The trust then became the shareholder, and the rest is history because after that it attracted other investors, including institutional investors. Yeah. But it has actually been very diverse in its approach. The Thebe portfolio, when I joined Thebe back in 2016, one of the things I used to say about Thebe was that it was an octopus because it was all over, and and that actually brought some light into, do we really want to remain an octopus? So we started trimming some of those elements, as you would see, coming to this point that some of those elements have actually been trimmed. But as we were doing that, we were also finding new interesting areas of investment. But also there was an over-concentration in one investment. I won't mention it by name.
Sure.
Because it was so huge. And we always also sounded alarm bells to say this is a risk, a concentration risk, because you have one investment where you actually have almost put in all your eggs. But we then began diversifying. And in doing that, back in 2017, that's when we actually started getting into food and agribusiness.
Yeah.
So that's where the Port Road, which was the largest, one of the agencies, fresh produce agencies at City Dip, Fresh Produce Market, where we bought a stake, predominantly, owned by 3 families, Afrikaners, and Thebe walked in as a fourth wheel.
Yeah.
And, they were quite happy to give us 51% of that business, and they sort of stepped back. And that's when we started learning that area as well. I remember, the early mornings where the market opens at 5 o'clock in the morning.
You'd be
so
there.
we would leave here at exactly 4 o'clock with Mkheti and get there at 5 o'clock because we want to see this thing in action.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. But also, it just turned out that agriculture is also my passion. So when we got there, it was very interesting. And the rest, again, is history there because, as you know, we actually just launched one of our, important flagship projects,
Yes.
which was Harvest Fresh.
In September this year.
Yes, it was actually postponed from September because I wasn't available, and they said, look, I had everything to do with it, and I don't know whether that is true. But as the George Maxted, the managing director there, indicated, it all came out of an article that we wrote as Thebe in the Sunday Times business section, which would be the Business Times, announcing Thebe's entry into the agri space. And we went on to just explain why we're going into that space, because it is actually in keeping and in line with Thebe's corporate statement and tagline of building communities being our bottom line.
Got you.
And agriculture is one of those sectors that are very close to communities. So moving into that space. And this guy, George Maxted, saw this thing, and his business had grown to a particular level, and he said, look, maybe these are the guys that I would want to go into business with. And that's when he sent his first email. This article was written, I think, in July, and then in August, because he says he kept in the actually
all in the same year.
Exactly. We have an article in one of those memos that we got.
I see it.
That was given to me as a gift, was that article, together with that email that George wrote to Mkheti to say, I read this article in the paper, and I think we need to talk. And then we visited him, and the rest again is history.
That's such a refreshing perspective.
Yes, that was back in 2017, and that pack house that has just been launched is now servicing that area in Meyerton, which actually, brings together even the smallest of the, farmers. Their produce comes to that, packaging facility, and even the largest of them. So that's where you get the largest and the smallest converging, and actually, So it's been a journey.
Yeah.
And it's not even easy to put it, in chronological order. As I tell the story, I do get, a bit lost in what has actually happened.
I find it fascinating because it speaks to so many aspects, not only to yourself as an individual, given that you are a farmer in your own personal capacity, but also just the journey that you've worked with Thebe Investment Group, as you say, as a non-executive director, actively participating in previous investments, and even how this serendipitous participation and partnership that took place over 5 years ago has now transitioned into this whole new growth opportunity.
Indeed.
But on that note, there's a lesson for us to learn there in terms of mergers.
Yep.
And partnerships and acquisitions in business.
Correct.
As we know, not only do you have to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to analyze the numbers, but of course there has to be a culture fit.
Absolutely.
How and what have the learnings and lessons been for some of the investments that you've spearheaded under Thebe in terms of finding the right partners?
Look, I think that has also been quite one of the difficult journeys, because it helped also that we had an executive team also that was very meticulous in actually, analyzing and evaluating all our investment deals, because you would have to, to know your story in order to be able to convince them. Because there was a time when they actually just didn't see value in investing in the agri space. So, the margins are low.
Volatile
so
as well
much
in terms of
volatile
weather.
and uncertainty and all of that. And we went in, and what we did, one of the things we did with Mkheti and the team was to actually analyze the entire value chain. To say agriculture is not only, as you would always, traditionally agriculture would fall into the primary sector.
Yes.
Agriculture is not in primary sector, it's in all sectors.
Full value chain.
The full value chain. So we said, in order to actually really, understand its value, you need to go through the entire value chain. And of course, at some point we're saying, okay, then we don't want to go beyond the farm gate. Let's, take it from the farm gate and that way. It later turned out that there's nothing wrong in going in also beyond the farm gate into
Right.
and really get dirty. And that's how this partnership with Harvest Fresh, because it actually starts from producing, and everything is about spinach, as they would say at Harvest Fresh. So, and then you go there also when you are at the market, you look at it's the real market, where the definition of the word market finds expression is at the fresh produce market, because that's where buyers and sellers meet. You get in the morning, as I said, 5 o'clock, that's when the trucks are coming in the night before, bringing in the produce. 5 o'clock, that's when the buyers are coming in to start buying the produce. By 11 o'clock, that place has cleared.
Sure.
By 11 o'clock, the place is cleared and people start doing their administration and preparing for the next day.
Makes sense.
And at that market, you actually, again, find a situation, and because that's the beauty of agriculture, it does not discriminate. You actually, it's from the person who buys a pocket of potatoes to go and sell on the street, or to cut it and make chips, right up to the largest, retailers who actually bring in horse and trailers to pull in several links to be able to transport. And I found it very interesting that one of those trucks that were actually loading one of the days in the morning was actually going into my area in Kranskop.
Oh, okay.
Quite a lot of them. And when I had a conversation with the guy that side, you told me that, no, those guys, I buy from them. And I was like, oh, you didn't know you're buying from us.
Comes full circle.
Indeed.
What this teaches me, Bab Nene, as well, is the fact that there's a very strong social impact that we see, especially when it comes to investment in agriculture. And perhaps you can give us some insight, both in your personal capacity as a farmer, but also your observations as a leader in the business community. We're well aware that perhaps we haven't capitalized on the agricultural sector effectively in South Africa to, number one, have the multiplier effect in terms of the value chain and economic output, but also in terms of the social benefits, employment, as well as the betterment of the livelihoods of many South Africans. And it would be remiss of me not to mention a company like Tongaat Hewlett, currently gone into business rescue, and of course being aware of some of the small-scale farmers who might be impacted by the potential closure of that business. How does this shape your view, I guess, in terms of investments, leadership, and making sure that there is a social aspect to the investments that Thebe Group makes?
I think it all goes to understanding the sector, just beginning to understand the sector, how it feeds into, because agriculture, I always say, it actually addresses all of the challenges and the ills of the country. Because you've just mentioned that, when it comes to employment, agriculture employs from the unskilled right up to the highly skilled, because technology this time in agriculture, you now have driverless tractors, you have these drones that are actually monitoring and in that operation, in that space. But so employment across the spectrum, from the unskilled right up to the highly skilled. Food security is an issue, because at the end of the day, and then deals with poverty. And now, as a farmer, if you go to the real root of it, a farmer begins by planting for survival, just to be able to actually get fresh veggies, which is what we're promoting. You'll be surprised with the small enterprise back home, that small retail shop that we run. I've got my daughter, my son, and both my daughters, my wife and my son, all of them have decided
the whole family,
we want to go into this, and they're enjoying it. My daughter, every Friday and Saturday, goes out into the communities. It's a small outfit. Goes into the community. She does one home, one gardens on Saturdays with the elderly ladies, mainly ladies. And on Fridays, she does this with the school kids. She does the One School, One Garden project. If you look at that, the way it actually has turned things around, she's done about 60 schools since July. And in those schools, all of them, some of them are harvesting now. The feeding scheme, if you want to look at the ecosystem as it works, feeding scheme, you would find that the school would now sell to the person who feeds the school. And the person would actually, that guy, would now buy from the school and give them fresh veggies from their garden, but also buy from them to feed other schools.
Got you.
So that's just how agriculture fits into it. But there are other very interesting initiatives also, including, if you, I'm not being paid by Kula to advertise for them, but we're a distributor for Kula Imports. Kula has got an app where you are able to access products as you go into that input, you cooler inputs, you go into that app and you are able to find any product that you're looking for, and that product will be delivered either on your doorstep or it will go to the nearest distributor. And
regardless of the area and how rural it might be.
Indeed. If you go into that one and try and order that product, now be it a herbicide, pesticide, you want seedlings and whatever, you will be able to buy. They've established kiosks all around, and it was based here in Joburg. This youngster, actually, he was so innovative in this thing, but it's all centered around agriculture, just to show what's missing in agriculture is market intelligence more than anything, because we talk about funding, and we forget that no matter how much funding you could give to the farmers, if they do not have market intelligence, they won't know what to produce, when to produce, at what scale, and who to produce for, and how to produce that. So that, other people are into organic stuff, other people are okay with the synthetic, all of that. So it's so wide. I can't be organized when I talk agriculture. Just
there are many hats to wear.
Yes, but again, like you're saying, then I think it is a pity that we actually have not understood the sector to be able to make the necessary investments in agriculture. In the past, and I'm not a fan of subsidies from government, that farmers should be subsidized. I think you should create an environment where farmers are able, one of the things that government actually for now subsidizes halfway is actually diesel. The price of diesel is actually mitigated a bit by what government actually offers farmers in the tax structure. But I think what's more critical is providing the technical support to the farmers, but also creating an environment. For instance, when you have this dumping of, some of the agricultural products coming into our country,
whether
impacting on all of that. Those are some of the areas where government should actually play a role in creating a space where farmers are able to actually flourish and to take advantage of the opportunities presented by that. So if you look at the previous years where the economy has been underperforming, you must look at those numbers and see which sector has actually held firm, even though, even during...
and that's agriculture, even through the pandemic.
Exactly, even through the pandemic.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is a perfect opportunity for me to jump in and, of course, address the question and concern that many of our listeners or viewers might have at the moment, to say, hold on, you've worn the hat of taking care of the national purse strings in South Africa under the leadership and, of course, the role and function of being the finance minister for a certain period. And I'm keen to understand, from your learnings both in and out, and having worked both in the public sector and the private sector, what your take is on the current state of the economy, and perhaps, again, the plugs and the holes and the gaps that we need to fill in order to make sure that we are able to resuscitate the economic recovery effectively.
Look, I must say that there isn't an easy way out of the situation we find ourselves in. It's just not a South African phenomenon. It's across the globe. Everybody is going through a difficult period. I was looking at the numbers, and the Fed has actually been raising interest rates and trying to curb inflation. Which has never happened in the past. And we're talking. I wouldn't even mention the UK, because they actually have, among other things, some of their challenges have been self-inflicted. I'm sure they could have done better than that. But I think we have lessons to learn as a country also from all of that. But our solutions lie within what we think we actually can. These are some of the things that we can harness. Talking agriculture is one of the areas that are actually, in my view, low-hanging fruit. But it shouldn't also just look at, how the farmer, survive. But it must be how the entire value chain is able to actually continue being the lifeblood of the economy, because at the end of the day, without that lifeblood, there needs to be some anchor of the economy. Well, of course, in the past, we've been fortunate because we are a mineral, resource country. So those metals have actually delivered. But what we didn't do, I don't think we were able to bank the benefits that we got out of the commodity booms. So now
by banking, do you mean that plowing that back into the fiscus through SARS, or perhaps also infrastructure investment?
You bank
right?
it exactly.
You consider Eskom,
absolutely.
Transnet.
You bank it in the productive capacity of the state, so that the state is able to actually survive even beyond,
Yeah.
the windfalls. So we had our windfalls, and perhaps I don't think we spent them wisely enough. And the area of, I would say, entitlement, with all our social security system that actually tries to address a serious challenge of poverty, of unemployment, or of inequality. But I don't think it gives the dignity that, poor people deserve. If you're poor, I don't think it is enough to receive something.
How would you do it differently?
I think it would work better, with the one home, one garden that we're talking about. The people that are actually planting, that are actually now running those gardens, are the people that are using their social security grants.
Oh, Koko Besasakati.
Yes, social security grant, we say to them, you guys, and they even have some kind of a stockpile that they run along this. But more than anything else, they actually, these food banks that you talk about at a very sophisticated level is something that actually survives lower down there, where people actually look after themselves and make sure that they actually they never go hungry. Right?
So there's a sense of
it
dignity,
doesn't cost them anything.
self-production, and inclusion.
It costs less than 30 rands to buy a packet of seed, where you will get close to 1,000 cabbage heads, 28 rands. Yeah? So, all of those things, all we're doing with them is we sit with them and we play around with this thing. And there was one of the kindergartens that said they want to plant. We visited them. We found that they don't have, they don't have a place to plant.
Yeah.
It's all concrete because they are renting somewhere. And you won't believe, I would share it with you here on the phone. We then went out and we created those boxes. They're planting in boxes, and they are harvesting their...
so almost urban farming, using
absolutely.
Materials to actually create the landscape.
Honestly, there's rooftop, all of those innovations actually come in handy, and they can actually feed the nation. But I'm saying what's important is to promote, the culture of self-sustainability. I'm not saying we shouldn't, it is a good stopgap to provide people with social security grants. But beyond that, what are we doing with them, working with them to make them realize that this is actually not enough? If you earn even the 350 rands, there's a few of those people that earn those 350 rands. Some of them, by the end of the day, all of that money has been spent. And some of them, of the 350, the 50 rands goes to buying some, a few trays of seedlings, go and plant them, and then buy some food to survive for the day.
Yep.
But,
there's a multiplier effect.
Absolutely. There is just so much we can do with the little that we have. And you don't have to have so much. In agriculture, that's one of the things. And once you start doing that, subsistence farming or subsistence living, especially in the rural areas.
Got you.
In the past, where I grew up in a rural area, what we knew was that when you have cabbage, you pass it on to the neighbor, and the neighbor gives you carrot. And it's not even the barter system, because it's not like you're trading.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're
but
providing a need.
When you just send it across, you're not in expectation of your neighbor to give you that, but the bowl that went with the stuff that came from you would come back full still.
Got you.
So it's in agriculture, as they say, is a culture also on its own.
Let's talk about culture, and maybe there's some lessons that you can share with us here, because a lot of us, again, when we reflect on leadership, both in business as well as politics, we recognize that there might be a gap. There is a significant lack of leaders of integrity in South Africa specifically. Help us understand. I've asked you about the state of the economy. I'm keen to get your thoughts on the state of leadership, being aware that we are moving into a change in dynamics in the political landscape in South Africa. But speak to us about culture and the culture of leadership that is lacking in the country at the moment, and how to correct that.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because some of these things we don't learn. We actually have to live them. They actually need to come from within. When I came, one of the things that actually connected me with Thebe was the culture. I got to, I had worked with Mr. Kanyile at various levels when there were interactions between business and government, but also in the organization. But when he invited me to Thebe back in 2016, it wasn't an interview as such, but we just had a conversation. A conversation over breakfast, and that conversation led to him saying, "Look, let me step back. I'll contact you during the course of next week to tell you what we can do together." And he then invited me, and in a capacity a position that never existed, they called me a resident advisor.
Not even non-executive director?
No, I was a resident advisor.
Okay.
Yeah. But saying, I'm advising Thebe, but I think I'm actually benefiting from Thebe instead of Thebe benefiting from me. But it was that symbiotic relationship. But the culture, again, where we would sit down, talk about these things, and out of those engagements, you come up with something. So leadership is something that, in my view, should actually be able to identify, and I'm now referring to Bab Kanyile as one of those leaders that have actually, looked upon as an inspiration. And you would sit with him and, throw business ideas on the table, talk about simple things, that would actually turn into a business idea, And at times, I think we want to, create a sophisticated definition of what leadership is.
Got you.
And yet, leadership actually is just about understanding, what society needs and how to actually, harness whatever is there and create value.
Got you.
And value with values at the same time.
Let's talk about that because
value also, it's more about monetary and material stuff, but values would actually be more human than anything else. So there is human with a conscience. There is also corporate with conscience.
Is that what also kept you going as finance minister?
Partly, yes. I would say so, because being anchored in your community, in your upbringing, which would be everything, your church, your school, your community itself, because your community actually shapes you, rather than. And I always say, at times as leaders, we think that we are, we're leading because we are making things happen.
Yeah.
And things that happen around us are actually those things that actually shape us into who we end up at the end of the day.
I think that's a strong note for us to actually conclude the conversation, because you've roped it back into leadership. And if I'm hearing anything very clearly, is that you tie it back to people, people within your own circle, people within your faith and your family, which is something that you alluded to earlier on.
Absolutely.
So to close off with, we've spoken to you as the chairman of Thebe Investment Corporation. We've spoken to you as a former leader within South Africa's public space. We've also spoken to you as a father, as a grandfather. For you, when you define leadership, incorporating all of these aspects that are part of your life, what word comes to mind?
Sure. You actually, it wouldn't be one word. I would really want to say, as I said earlier, that your life is shaped by the environment in which it is what you actually give back once you have actually taken out. Because we take out so much out of what's around us, but I don't think we give back enough of what we've taken out.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing how you pay back, and maybe you can give us some insight as to what's next. You mentioned that you just turned 64.
Yeah.
We don't want you to retire, we are honest.
Right.
So I guess if you can give us some insight as to what
I don't think
might
I'm
be
going to retire entirely because I'm not tired.
Sure.
What I will do.
So no golf.
I just would a little bit of that.
Just a little.
Actually, I do play a little bit of golf every Sunday afternoon. That's where I actually, because other than that, my therapeutic space is in the agriculture space, with animals, with walking the fields.
They're not as complicated as human beings, right?
Absolutely, but they talk back to you in various ways. In various ways.
Gotcha.
We have got layers, chicken that lay eggs. Those, it's a lesson I learned. Nobody taught me that. When you go there to collect eggs, you start by feeding before you collect eggs. If you make a mistake of starting by collecting eggs, as I spoke about giving back, about collecting eggs first before you feed, you must see what you're going to get the following day. They'll punish you.
Oh, Okay, on that note, I think that's a lesson and a half. Giving back before you actually collect and having chickens punish you. I think I want to see this and experience it, but the warning is already enough. Bab Nene, we're really appreciative of your time today, sir, taking us through a journey of leadership and, of course, sharing your passion regarding agriculture with us. And, of course, helping us remember that you're not done just yet. There's still more to contribute and continue to give back.
Yeah.
Well, that's been our conversation with Nhlanhla Nene, who's joined us in his capacity as the chairman of Thebe Investment Corporation.